תתהלך בארץ בתרמיל ובמקל, וודאי תפגוש בדרך שוב את ארץ ישראל, יחבקו אותך דרכיה של הארץ.
Hi, this is R.A. Green, author of My Israel Trail, and we're back with Militz Radio with the Tales from the Trail. I think this is the 7th episode, and we're doing this a little bit differently. You can hear some noise in the background, and if you're listening on the radio, you might want to click on the link to the YouTube video because we're here with the video to see and to talk about Sataf, the archaeological both excavations and amazing living reconstruction of biblical era farming techniques, terraced farming here in the Jerusalem hills. Now, for those of you on the radio, I want to describe what we're looking at, and then I'm going to set the camera down and we'll talk a bit about both this particular area and the next stage of my personal journey in terms of the lessons that I learned. This Sataf is, you're looking now at a spring. Oh, and you can hear in the background, this is kind of an experiment. I hope that my voice comes through with the microphone in a way that is not too much bothered by the noise of children splashing and families picnicking in the background. We're looking here at a particular spring in Sataf, which is actually a cave, and the water that comes out of the rocks here, creating a small pool, and then feeding into a larger pool, which you can see in the background if you're watching the video. If you're listening on the radio, it's about maybe 5 meters by 5 meters, perhaps even bigger than that, and very deep. And this whole water system was created to provide irrigation in biblical times for the farming activities that were done here in the Jerusalem hills. And I'm now in the shade where I can stand and talk a little bit more about the Israel Trail and my hike and the lessons learned. And as I tested it before with the voices in the background, I hope it's not too much of a distraction to our listeners and those watching on the video. Well, Sataf for me embodies what was really one of the most important elements of hiking the Israel Trail. And that is the connection that we have in hiking the trail, not only to the beauty of the land, but the history, and the history of our forefathers who were here, who lived here, who fought here, who brought to the world the moral code of the Hebrew Bible, and of course, who farmed here. And here in Sataf, just 20 minutes out of Jerusalem, is this wonderful reconstruction where volunteers come and plant orchards and fields, vineyards, and other produce, and recreate this biblical era technology, if you will. I like the word technology because it may not be high-tech, but back then it was a very, very important element of the ability to thrive on the land by capturing water in the mountain that seeps through the rocks and then helping to channel it through some caves and caverns into pools like these, and then creating a sophisticated way to have the water delivered to the fields themselves. Now, I'm showing you very quickly for those of you on the video, and I'll describe for those of you listening on the radio. This is the Israel Trail sign. You can see here on the wall. And back behind us, or ahead of us, depending on where you're facing, are some buildings from not quite biblical era, but also going back about 1,400, 1,700 years to the time of the Byzantine period. And some of the excavations here have been dated back even further to the early biblical, the First Temple era. Now I'm going to walk to a shady area that's a little bit further from the spring, because I'd like to talk about some serious issues and there's no question that this has become a very popular spot. It's not very crowded now in terms of what it would normally be with Corona, obviously still putting something of a damper on the kind of activities that Israelis often pursue at this time of year in the late spring as the weather turns hotter. But I think it's loud enough that I want to be sensitive to our listeners and our viewers and move just a little bit further away. But I'm not stopping the recording because the pleasure of hearing the children in the background and seeing the families picnicking is part of a visit here to Sataf. And I'm happy to have been able to share it with you. But I'm going to find here a quiet spot. It is in the shade, and I apologize to those of you viewing that this is not a professionally filmed presentation, but the important issues that are the important elements of our program are, of course, the discussion of the hike on the Israel Trail and the lessons learned, not so much the professionalism of the videography. I'm just going to show a quick view here towards the east and the south. This is east and this is south. For those of you who are listening on radio, we're looking at the hills of Jerusalem, covered in greenery, trees, grasses, wildflowers. Below us here in Sataf is one of the orchards, one of the fruit tree areas that are maintained, as I said, by volunteers. And in the distance you can see the tower, the Davidson Tower, the new Davidson Tower of Hadassah, Ein Kerem, the Hadassah Hospital. And there's a beautiful hawk soaring in the green sky just above, in the blue sky, excuse me, just above, which kind of brings us back to the theme of the last few weeks, which was kind of a peaceful silence, as it were. Now here in Sataf, we're not going to have this kind of silence that we've been talking about the last few weeks, but that's okay, because that silence was obviously very specific for a particular time and a particular place in terms of the desert that we're familiar with. So we're here in Sataf, and I'm now kind of ensconced in a shady spot in one of the orchard places, and I'd like to talk about one of the main issues that became for me a central part of the trail and the experience that I had in the trail of recovering from my divorce. Now I'm just going to, as I adjust the camera so that we can get settled and talk, I want to do a little bit of a review, as it were, for those of you just joining us, because of course there are people who will be joining us who haven't listened necessarily to all of the first episodes. But as it's noted on the Lease Radio, this is a series of discussions, conversations, if you will, or presentations of the themes and the experiences that I outline or I describe in the book, My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land. The book is about my hike, solo hike, over the course of 8 weeks, 48 days of hiking on the Israel National Trail, 1,000 kilometers, which I did virtually alone, certainly most days, and which I did with a 25 kilo, 50 pound pack on my back, as those of you listening already know. And I learned a number of lessons which were important to me, because I hiked the trail at a time a number of years ago when I was 51, not that long ago, 6 years ago, when I was just trying to heal from a very, very difficult divorce, a divorce that was not my choice, a divorce that literally turned my life upside down. And therefore, for me, the hike on the Israel Trail was one more mechanism that I found, a tool to help me literally get back on the path of life and get back on the trail, as it were. So if you followed along until now, we've talked a lot about humility and about acceptance and about gratitude. And now I want to move on from that basis. And last week I described a meditative practice which I had developed and used extensively on the trail, of combining these ideas of understanding our perspective in life with a certain humility and modesty, accepting the reality that we're facing, whether it's divorce or whether it's another personal challenge or whether it's just hiking up a steep hill on a hot day on the trail and realizing that we made a mistake and took the wrong path and accepting that and trying to make a good decision to move forward. And I talked a lot in the last few weeks about gratitude. Now, I was grateful, as I described, for all the little and the big things that I was exposed to, whether it was a flower on the trail or the walking sticks that my daughter-in-law had given me, or for a Snickers bar that I found at the bottom of the pack to have as a treat at the top of a particular mountain. I was also very grateful, full of appreciation for all the wonderful things, the blessings in my life, my family and my friends who had been so supportive of me. And even I was grateful for the wonderful and fulfilling life that I had shared with my former wife in building literally a Bayit Ne'eman b'Yisrael, as it's called in Hebrew, a faith-filled home here in Israel, quite literally, although the phrase in Hebrew refers also within the community of Israel, but we did it also in the state of Israel. And I was incredibly grateful for that as well. And you know, it reminded me of a quote, I think I described this in the book, from Lao Tzu, where he says, "Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize that there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. From wonder into wonder, existence opens." And I love that quote because it enables us to recognize that having a positive mental attitude and recognizing your own blessings really opens up a whole wide world to you. Now, of course, for me, the gratitude for my 28-year-long marriage was not easy to achieve, marred as it was by my wife's leaving. But realizing my own inconsequentiality, if that's a word, having a sense of humility and accepting that reality and pushing myself to remember and appreciate all the wonderful aspects of the life that we had built together. That was crucial as part of the process enabling me to reach the fourth and for me in this journey, I think the most important element, which is why we're going to spend a little time this segment and next talking about it. And that element is forgiveness. Now, I guess a little background is in order, because I haven't really gone into this in detail in the first 5 or 6 segments of our program. I had an incredibly happy marriage. We had an incredibly happy marriage. We were seen as a paradigm of friendship, partnership, love, affection, exuberance, and what a marriage really can be among our friends and our family, and certainly to our children. My wife experienced, as it were, a sudden storm, which tossed and overturned the ship of our marriage and my life. And it was unexpected. It was a shock to all of our family and friends. And though I supported her right to choose as an adult, which I think I mentioned before, and I wanted her to be happy, it was an incredibly difficult time. And I guess what I want to share with you in this segment is an understanding of not just how shocking that was, but how deeply committed I was and am to the institution of marriage, to the idea of sticking with it, to my wife and the love that we had shared. And even when I gave her the get, the halachic Jewish marriage annulment document, the bill of divorce, I said to her, not only do we not have to do this, we can step back from this even now, but that this, giving you your freedom, as it were, is the greatest act of love I can do. Because if it makes you happy, if this is what you want, this is what I want for you. And I'm willing to do that and give it to you to make you happy. But I was devastated. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that sorrow, that suffering, that frustration, even the anger and resentment that it engendered made it very difficult, not only to be grateful for the life that we shared, the life that we built together, the communities that we helped to build, the children that we raised, the wonderful faith-filled home, as I said, that we had created. All that made it not only difficult to be grateful, but it certainly made it difficult to have any sense of real forgiveness. Now, I guess one of the things that I want to share in this and the next segment is the difference between an intellectual sense. As I said, I recognized her right as an adult to make a choice that she was, that she wanted to end the marriage. And intellectually, I recognized that. And maybe even you could say intellectually in my brain, in my mind, I forgave her because I had that attitude towards life and her right to make her own decisions, that I really couldn't hold that against her. And yet, in the silence of the desert that I described in previous segments, I recognized that I was still carrying a great burden of anger and resentment. And whatever forgiveness I had achieved was, if not shallow, certainly at only one level of my or our psyche. Now, it's funny because those of you who followed so far can recognize that the elements of these lessons that I learned on the trail. I learned as aspects of the physical hike on the trail, and I've described the humility that came to me in the midst of the desert. We have a group of young men, I would say too young to know better, who are yelling for their teacher in the background. I'm going to continue the conversation, but I'm going to move beyond them to find a quieter spot again. I was talking about the silence of the desert, and our silence here it clearly has been interrupted, and that's okay because it's a public area with obviously public access. So what I was describing in the silence of the desert, I achieved a certain element of humility, and in the physical difficulties of hiking up very, very difficult terrain, I found myself in a situation where I had to accept the reality that I was in, that I described in an earlier segment, on the side of a mountain. So these were physical elements of the trail itself, which then led me to an understanding of some of the issues that I was dealing with in facing my own personal challenges. And it's not really quite as intuitive. I mean, other aspects that I've shared with you are perhaps more intuitive in how a lesson learned on the trail might be applied to life. Forgiveness doesn't immediately come to mind as something that you maybe perhaps experience on a hike, as it were. But I will say that when hiking over an extended period, there are many things and people and situations about which you can complain. I've mentioned before the steep inclines and the heat and what have you, and I spent a lot of time working to forgive the author of the Red Guide, the unofficial, informal guide that one takes along and uses when one is hiking the trail. To forgive him, his name is Yaakov Sar, and I have forgiven him wholeheartedly. But I spent a number of situations complaining about instructions that either weren't clear or where something was said that you should do this and in fact you shouldn't, and missing information or what have you. I mean, it's a wonderful guide, and of course I recommend it to everybody who wants to hike the Israel Trail. And Yaakov has been courteous enough to take a few suggestions from me over the years. We've kept up a dialogue since even before I wrote the book. I was in touch with him actually during the trail and afterwards to ask a question or to offer a suggestion. I mean, but that's a little bit mundane, but it is important to understand that was part of my experience, that there were a number of times over the course of the weeks of the hike where I really had to work to forgive Yaakov for being misleading or unhelpful, and there were other issues. I mean, I had to forgive myself a lot Again, I'm talking here about the physical hike, missing the trail sign, and getting angry at myself, or taking a wrong turn, or making a decision, as the one I described in one of the first segments, to hike up a tangential path and find myself on the side of a cliff, hot, bothered, and not able to get to the night camp before dark. It happened a number of times, and if you read the book, you can you can see it's something of a recurring theme. And so there you can imagine that my anger at myself, at the author of the guide, at small inconveniences or challenges that I faced while hiking the trail, these got in the way. They diminished to a certain extent my enjoyment of the trail. And so, all the more so, my anger and resentment over the way that my wife left me, the decisions she took, and the fact that I was divorced. These got in the way of my really being able to heal and to move on with my life and to enjoy life. And I think that that's one of the things that I really always want to share with people who are facing their own challenges: the importance of forgiving God for allowing this to happen, forgiving my wife or whoever is hurting us or perceived hurts, forgiving ourselves for mistakes that we've made and our own contribution to whatever is causing us pain. And this is true not just personally, but communally, nationally even. I think this forgiveness is an essential part of moving ahead with our lives and developing cooperative and harmonious relationships. In fact, my next book, here's a little teaser, that I'm working on now, is an application of the lessons that I'm sharing with you here in this program and that I wrote about in my book, sharing those lessons or applying those lessons to the Arab-Israel conflict. You can imagine, here's a little teaser, how a little bit of humility might go a long way in trying to resolve our conflict. That the issue of appreciation for the blessings in our lives and what we have achieved is as appropriate on a national level as it is on a personal level. Obviously, an acceptance of the reality that we face is important. Now, I'll get to this a little bit more, I think, in the next segment on forgiveness, because I want to relate to the whole national issue, but I do think that forgiveness is a very important element in reconciliation between peoples, as it is between individuals. And I guess I talk a little bit in the book about how it's important. It's not only a question of forgiving, it's necessary to forgive and forget. You know what? Even if we forgive and remember, we certainly have to forgive in order to put behind us the grievances that we have to reach real inner peace. And it's true in terms of our historical grievances as a nation for international peace. But I think we'll come back to that next time. I read many books by Leo Buscaglia that you may be familiar with. He taught an iconic class called Love at the University of Southern California and USC for many years. And it was, I think, the most popular class in the university for many years. And in his books, in his teachings, he talks, for instance, about the importance of forgiving our parents. That we have to forgive our parents for their very humanness, for being human, and for the mistakes they made. And he passionately advocates moving on and exploring all the alternative paths that are available to us in any given situation. Gandhi did the same. And the truth is, we're here in the Sataf, which is, as I said, one of my favorite places on the trail. And here I experienced a great sense of gratitude, which I talk about in the book. But you can read in the book, if you're at all interested, there were a number of incidents when I was hiking the trail, especially in the north, where I experienced a profound sense of forgiveness. One in Nahal Snir in the Hatzbani River, one in the Baram Forest, also in the north. These set me up for a decisive transition. They gave me an experience which perhaps maybe in one of our wrapping up sessions I'll forgive more in detail. But I'll share right now, just very quickly, our time is running out, one of those experiences, because they were instrumental in transforming my forgiveness in my mind to the forgiveness of the heart, a real complete forgiveness that really could enable me to move on with my life. That happened at Nachal Snir in a little pool where, if I can, I'll throw up a photo here. I'm not sure how the technology is going to enable me to work on this video to throw in some photos, but if I can, then I will have done so, and you'll know it as you're watching. There in the Chatzpani at Nachal Snir was a small pool in the creek, in the river, where we had taken our children, my wife and I, many times for wonderful holidays, and we used to swim and splash and float and glide in that pool. And when I got to that pool, this is in the fifth week of the trail, up there on the border with Lebanon, just outside of Metula. When I got there, I decided I had to jump in. And this was something that you might remember from an earlier description of my youngest daughter's boyfriend, who is now her husband and father of her now 2 children, had challenged me to jump into every spring that I passed, and I did so as much as I could. But in this case, it was much more an inner emotional need. I looked around to make sure there was nobody around. I stripped off all my clothes and jumped in the water, and something extraordinary happened. Between the memories of our family vacations there and the realization that we would never be there again as a family, because now the family unit had been broken, I jumped into the water, and of course the telling of the story takes much longer than the actual occurrence itself, and I started crying. I'm not embarrassed. I think I've shared this before. I cry relatively easily. I think it's very healthy, and I just welled up with emotion. And there under the water, almost a mikveh type experience of immersing in the living waters of here, the land of Israel, I really experienced an incredible release. And I came out of the water with tears streaming down my face, and of course the water mingling with the tears. And I realized I really, truly, completely forgive my former wife. And that was an extraordinary experience for me at the time. It was not just a release, it was something that was tremendously uplifting. It gave me a great sense of closure, because although, as I had said, I had intellectually recognized her right to take her decision, and in my mind I had forgiven her because that's the sort of person I am. This was a much deeper, gut level, heartfelt forgiveness, which, coming out of the water, I felt cleansed. I felt literally like I had been born again, born anew, as it were. And that sense of truly, completely, and deeply forgiving her with a full heart was transformative for me, just as much as if you followed my recent segment about the transformative experience I had in the desert, walking and feeling so at one with the universe, that it just gave me this wonderful perspective, an uplifting perspective, feeling like, not that I'm a prophet, but like the prophets of Israel who wandered in the desert and gained such an acute sense of God and creation and the connectedness of all things. So here in the pool in Nachal Snir, I experienced a similarly powerful, uplifting sense of release. I guess I just want to close, because we're coming to 30 minutes. What I'm trying to say is that hiking the trail for me included not only the historical sense of connection to our people and our land, and a wider sense of my place in the universe and my place in the wide swath of our people's history, but also a very personal sense of an understanding of the moral imperative to forgive, which is something that runs very strong through our tradition, through Jewish tradition, within the context of tshuva, within the context of Yom Kippur, tshuva being well, this is the difficulty of working in media where you're not necessarily an expert. For the technology challenged like me, recording on a phone for a radio and video program involves a number of elements which I'm just beginning to learn to enjoy, one of which is the reminder to turn your phone onto airplane mode so that you don't get a phone call in the midst of recording a video, as I was doing with you here, and then it stops the recording of the video. I'm hoping to be able to splice this last bit in with without too much of difficulty, but that was a quick interruption, which enables me to gather my thoughts in order to conclude our discussion of forgiveness. The truth is that forgiveness is a very, very important part of Jewish tradition. The concept, whether it's Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, or the general issue of tshuva, of doing repentance, of asking forgiveness when we've wronged someone, and the importance of granting that forgiveness, is something that resonates and reverberates throughout our tradition in so many different ways. And I think for me, the revelation, if I can use that term, and the feeling of release that came when I recognized that I had gotten to the point, having gone through this process of humbly accepting this reality of the divorce, and then focusing on the gratitude that I have for the blessings in my life, enabling me then to reach this deeper level of forgiveness. That, to a great extent, was a pivotal moment, as I said, and I think that it's important for in so many ways for all of us when we are trying to deal with, whether it's the small and mundane issues of forgiving the author of the Trail book for leading me astray, or admitting my own mistakes on the trail or in my marriage, and committing not to repeat them, as it were, and actively forgiving the universe, as it were, for putting me in the position that I was. Well, that kind of sums up this segment about forgiveness and about the fourth stage of the learnings on the trail. I'm very glad that I came out here to one of my favorite places in Israel, here to Sataf, the forest and national park. I'm going to show you again, if you didn't see it from the beginning, the view as we finish of the Jerusalem hills. And I would invite you, if you live in Israel, if you visit Israel, to come and explore these hills. If you can't do it yourself personally, then I'm certainly happy that you're joining me vicariously. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion of forgiveness, and I hope you'll join us for the rest of the series. This is My Israel Trail, and these are Tales from the Trail on Malitz Radio. Thanks for joining us. I'm Aryeh Green.
להתהלך בארץ בתרמיל ובמקל, וודאי תפגוש בדרך שוב את ארץ ישראל. יחבקו אותך דרכיה של הארץ הטובה,